Hello and welcome to our countdown of the top 10 most controversial United States protests and demonstrations. From civil rights, to war, to gender equality, Americans have taken to the streets to express their opinions and advocate for change. Some protests have led to positive change, while others have sparked controversy and debate. In this countdown we will explore the events that made these protests so controversial. Number 10. The 2006 immigration protests. In 2006, millions of immigrants took to the streets across the United States to protest a proposed immigration reform bill. These protests were notable for their size and the fact that they took place mostly in urban areas. The demonstrations sparked debate about immigration policy and the proper role of immigrants in American society. Number 9. The 2014 Ferguson protests. The shooting of Michael Brown in 2014 led to widespread protests in Ferguson, Missouri and throughout the United States. Protesters marched for justice and against police brutality. The demonstrations brought national attention to issues of race and inequality in the criminal justice system. Number 8. The 2017 Charlottesville protests. The Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017 brought together white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and other far-right groups. The protests were marked by violence and chaos, with one counter-protester killed and many others injured. The demonstrations brought national attention to the rise of far-right extremism in the United States. Number 7. The 2012 Chicago Teachers Union strike. In 2012, the Chicago Teachers Union went on strike to protest proposed changes to their contracts. The strike lasted 7 days and impacted over 300,000 students. The protest highlighted issues of teacher pay and the role of teachers in America. Number 6. The 2011 Occupy Wall Street protests. The Occupy Wall Street protests in 2011 brought attention to issues of income inequality and corporate greed. The protesters set up camp in numerous cities across the United States, with New York City being the epicenter. The demonstrations inspired similar protests in other countries and brought national attention to the growing wealth gap in America. Number 5. The 1992 Rodney King protests. The beating of Rodney King by police officers in 1992 sparked widespread protests in Los Angeles and other cities. The protests were marked by violence and looting, with over 50 people killed. The demonstrations brought national attention to issues of police brutality and racism. Number 4. The 1968 Democratic National Convention protests. The 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago was marred by protests and violence. Anti-Vietnam War demonstrators clashed with police, resulting in hundreds of injuries and arrests. The protests brought national attention to the anti-war movement and issues of civil liberties. Number 3. The 2016 Women's March. The 2016 Women's March brought millions of people to the streets around the world to protest the inauguration of President Donald Trump. The demonstrations were notable for their size and diversity, with participants advocating for issues like reproductive rights, immigration, and climate change. Number 2. The 1963 March on Washington. The 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. Over 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. to hear Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. The protests helped to bring about major civil rights legislation and brought national attention to issues of racial inequality. Number 1. The 1969 Stonewall Riots. The Stonewall Riots in 1969 were a turning point in the gay rights movement. After a police raid on the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York City, patrons and others in the community fought back against police brutality. The protests sparked a national conversation about LGBTQ+ rights and helped to catalyze the gay rights movement. Conclusion. There you have it, the top 10 most controversial United States protests and demonstrations. From civil rights to gender equality, these protests have been instrumental in shaping American society and bringing about change. We hope this countdown has inspired you to learn more about the history of protests in the United States, and to continue advocating for the causes that you hold dear. Don't forget to download our video, share, like and also comment for more information on the most effective ways to protest and advocate for change in your community.